All right. I think I think I think we're live. Yeah, I think we are live. So, let's see. How about we start with a little bit of music to see if everybody is with us. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me, if the visuals are good, all of that. There's a little bit of a lag to be expected, but yeah, let's hear that again. It's a little girl from Ipanema while we're waiting. This is the quintessential elevator music. Everybody hear me okay? Just let me know in the chat. All right. All right. All right. Let us get going, shall we? Yeah. People populating the chat, starting to talk, concurrent viewers, etc. All right. Yeah. So, hello. Welcome to the final live stream of the semester. Probably, most likely, I'm not gonna pigeonhole our lovely time together like that. If you have a desire for another one before commencement, let me know. If you want me to keep doing these, you want to join in, let me know. I am happy to do it. I have really enjoyed the few times that we have done it, and it has worked, and not been my fault why it hasn't worked. But yeah, here we are. So, all right, let me see. Everybody hearing me okay? We good? I don't know that I can. Let's see. I'm typing this into chat so that so I can check something out real quick. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay. So, we are ready to get this show on the road. I am very, very, very excited for this stream. I've been prepping for a little bit, and yeah, by a little bit I mean I've been checking my email every 5 minutes, waiting for certain technological tools to arrive so that I would be able to do this with relative ease. So let's hope that everything works out. Yeah, I'm wearing headphones, and I've got, like, right here, you can't see it, I've got a condenser mic. Hopefully that's gonna make the sound and the video pretty good. So if that makes it better, let me know as well. If everything's terrible with the stream and you just want to die, also let me know. We'll talk about it. But with that said, let's get going, right? So, this is the final live chat, talk, lecture, what have you, of the 2019-2020 school year. And what a year it's been, right? What a time to be alive. I've been thinking a lot about endings recently. Thinking a lot about how commencement is coming up, and for seniors, it's the end of their college career, and thinking about how strange this commencement is compared to other commencements that I've been a part of. Um, it's the end of the semester for our courses, and so we are thinking about what is going on with our courses and what how are we getting all our work done with all the other responsibilities we might have, the other sort of frustrations, anxieties, etc. that we might have. And I'm thinking about this in terms of, with my own life trajectory as a kind of ending as well. But rather than get sappy at the start of the live stream, I thought we'd begin with some delight. So, some jokes, a few laughs, the usual. I figured that since this is the last lecture, last talk of the year, it would be appropriate to be over caffeinated, overdressed. I mean, I'm wearing actual pants. I'm dressed like I would if I were going to actually teach this class face to face, and ready to bring you the good stuff. And by good stuff, I mean the good stuff. That's right. That is the closest approximation I can get to the legendary Buffalo Meltdown. By good stuff, I mean obscure references to thinkers, movies, and books you've only marginally read or understood. I'm talking about far too many references to fast food. I'm talking about excessively detailed descriptions of Pokemons and characters from Animal Crossing. And I am talking about tangents that turn into morality tales, that turn into jokes that whip back to the point I was trying to make all along. This is what I mean by the good stuff. Look, the world is a mess right now, and a lot of people are facing uncertainty in terms of housing, employment, and their well-being, their family members' well-beings. There are plenty of folks who are, on the one hand, pushing to reopen everything and get going, and other people who are trying to keep everything shut down because we're waiting for adequate testing to be built up and for adequate capacity for caring for humans to be built up. On the other hand, economic concerns are real concerns. So it can be really confusing out there. It can be scary. But let's hold all of that in abeyance. Let's put in a little bit of phenomenological suspension and let all the confusion that you're feeling come only from what I'm saying as you're trying to understand the words that come out of my mouth. So let's sit back, take in the sights, and let's talk about some stuff. So, yeah, okay. I do not know why nobody's talking in chat. Is it working? Yeah, we got 7 concurrent viewers. Stream status is good, so I don't know. Nobody's talking in the chat, which is wild. Y'all are usually going bonkers in the chat. Usually about Skyrim. Yeah. So anyway, I'm going because it's going. Everything's live. Everything's good. All right. So, where are we here? I gotta look at my command center and everything. Make sure everything is working just peachy. Yeah. So, all right. Enough of the Buffalo Meltdown. You're probably getting either nostalgic like me. Lord knows I've made my own version of the Quarantine Buffalo Meltdown too many times to count. It might be a regular lunch. But that's neither here nor there. Yeah, we'll jump here. So here's what I was thinking we could do for the live chat today. I was thinking, first of all, what we can do is walk through the semester, recap what we talked about. I'm going to try and touch on the different units that I've talked about in throughout the semester and that we've encountered. And then we'll shift from that kind of semester long situating to talking about Nelson Maldonado Torres' own work before then transitioning to really focusing in on the first 5 of his 10 theses on decoloniality or coloniality and decoloniality. And really, you read what is called only an outline. But if that's an outline, I have no idea what his next book is going to be like, because it's going to be phenomenal, because that outline is great. So, all right, it is really bothering me that I'm getting nothing in the chat. Let me see what's going on here. What does this do? Pop out the chat. Let's see if this will do anything. Oh, hey, what? Oh, all of a sudden I can see everything that everybody's been talking about in the chat. Go figure. Okay. Beck wants more streams, wishes for death in general. Funny. Okay. Beck, you are opposed to saucy sandwiches. Go figure. All right. Yeah. Okay. So I popped out the chat and everything seems to be good. I can actually follow with you. So that is very good. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to take a sip of coffee, and then, so my apologies if ASMR fires off, or I have no idea how that works, but I'm just letting you know, because drinking and eating in front of a microphone is always everybody's favorite thing. All right. So we began our semester by engaging with the work of Ramon Grossfoguel. And I think that his work was really helpful for us in terms of giving us an idea of the kind of discussion that we were getting ourselves into, right? The very beginning of the class was situated around how the reconquista, the reconquest of Spain by sort of the northwestern part of Spain, and the subsequent treatment of Arabs and people of Arabic descent, people of Jewish descent who were living in Andalusia, the sort of south, like the southeastern part of Spain, how that relation led to the development of modern forms of racism or racial understanding, and how that also directly tied into the colonizing enterprise that followed, right? The Reconquista takes place and is the condition of possibility for the conquista, the conquest of the Americas, right? So from there, we moved into talking about colonization in the early philosophies of the Americas. We're talking about indigenous thinkers such as the Arawaks, the Caribs, and the Taínos, and then we began moving on to more colonial thinkers like Las Casas and Simón Bolívar. And as we did this, we worked our way forward in time, jumping into Unit 2, where we began to wrestle with this idea of identity. When Bolivar claims, Bolivar, Simon Bolivar. When Bolivar claims, I'm paraphrasing him here, that we, the peoples of Latin America, are neither Indian nor are they European, but we're something else. That something else, that mestizo identity, for lack of a better term, is itself a way of thinking that bears certain baggage with it. And that almost automatically brings us into discussions about race, gender, ethnicity, and identity, self-understanding. And so we wrestled with this. We looked at the chief folks who talk about these issues. Namely, we looked at Gracia and we looked at Linda Martin Alcoff and Frantz Fanon as we examined these issues related to identity and self-understanding, because identity varies, and identity is directly connected to conceptions of what it means to be a human being, who counts as a human being, who does not. These questions led us into Unit 3, which was the one that we just sort of got out of. In that most of the live streams, in fact, all of the live streams were essentially Unit 3. We're looking at Anibal Quijano, we're looking at Santiago Castro Gomez, we're looking at Sylvia Winter, and even some elements of Maria Lugones, although Lugones brought us into Unit 4 on decolonial thinking. If we're currently in decolonial thinking, where we were was thinking about what the effects of colonization are, what lingers. And in the article that I had you read for this week, there's some element of Maldonado Torres going back and rehashing some of those ideas in, I think, a really good paraphrasing way. And in this decolonial moment, this unit number 4 on decolonial futures, we're going to weave all of that together to talk about what does the future look like in a decolonial register, decolonial lens. And I'm not using that term flippantly. I'm using it specifically in reference to Maldonado Torres' own thought, but also to those he's in conversation with, rather than to just be like, hey, let's, decolonize Pokemon collecting or something like that. Gotta catch them all. Do you really want to catch them all? Right? Who to the Pokemon trainer is Pidgey or Rattata? These are the questions. Yeah, cool. All right, so I'm gonna look before we jump into Maldonado Torres specifically. I want to look at, we'll look at the chat. I want to see if anybody has any questions. Beck, you're opposed to ASMR. I feel you. I think it's weird, but I'm not gonna yuck any yums. All God's children, etc., etc. Yeah. All right. Anybody, the real Pokemon questions. Yeah, exactly. Who to the trainer is a Rattata? Right? There is a completely uncalled for, unnecessary, but will get you an A, not in this class, in some other class, Pokemon thesis that looks at how which Pokemon are deemed valuable and which are not, even though they are, like powerful Pokemon, right? I think you could definitely make a case that like there's some coloniality going on in terms of Rattata, in terms of Pidgey. I don't know what else. In terms of Diglett, I always referred to Diglett as Douglas, probably because Doug Trio got that lovely bad chair sounds. Yeah. Okay. You probably won't see my child anytime soon because he's taking a nap or is supposed to be. But all right, let's see. Yeah. Excuse me. But maybe if you're lucky, he'll make his way in. Yeah. I think it's odd This is in no way, shape, or form a judgment of those of you who are like, hey, I want to see cute babies. But I think it's weird uh, to 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 broadcast someone's image without I don't know, without their consent. Now that they're like like kind of a person, and he's kind of a person, and he probably would be like, yeah, I don't want you broadcasting my image. Or at least he wants his image rights. Anyway, so I'm gonna stop talking about that and talk about Pokemon. I guarantee you I'll get back to talking about Pokemon. In some way, shape, or form, we will, because that's just the oddity that is our classes. you're yeah. All right. So let's see. I was trying to create a mini soundboard, so that there could be like musical cues when we transition, or and that sort of a thing. And all I came up with was this. So there you go. Now we're talking about Nelson Maldonado Torres. All right. So I got no problem with Ditto. Got no problem with Ditto. Ditto's fine. Ditto's fine. Ditto doesn't suffer from an identity crisis. Ditto is so confident in Ditto's selfhood that Ditto is able to mirror other Pokemon. And in that sense, Ditto has transcended to really a kind of next level thing. People are afraid of Ditto because it looks like sentient jello. They're not saying the truth, which is that they are intimidated by Ditto's self-confidence, which seems to be infinite, as opposed to hubris, which is what you get with someone like, I don't know, Machamp. Anyway, that was a digression upon a digression. Let's talk about Nelson Maldonado Torres. So, Nelson Maldonado Torres, I have his book. I don't have it with me. His book is great. And I'll get to it in a second, but he was, from what I can gather, he's born in Puerto Rico, went to the University of Puerto Rico for his undergrad, student in philosophy, religious studies, and he's worked with Grosfoguel and Enrique Dussel. He, for years, was a professor for a few years at least, was a professor at the same school as Grosfoguel, and then shifted to Rutgers University, where he currently teaches. He does research and does presentations all over the place. And by all over the place, I mean all over the world. And his main work is a book called Against War. And Against War is a really powerful book because what Maldonado Torres does is he takes three figures in the history of contemporary history of Western philosophy, and he examines them in a decolonial register. He begins with Emmanuel Levinas before moving on to talking about Frantz Fanon and Enrique Dussel. And does some really, really good work on all three of them, highlighting strengths and weaknesses, but always coming back to this idea of war. Why is it that certain forms of war, certain forms of violence are taken to be very fundamental in terms of being objects of thought for these three philosophers? It's not that they think about this all the time and like war. Far from it. It is just that many people in the history of philosophy have taken violence and war for granted without unpacking it that deeply, and what Fanon, Dussel, Levinas do is they unpack it. Now they all have their own baggage, of course, and he points this out, but in that book he's really putting forward this idea. And what he's doing is he's bringing certain philosophical methods into conversation with the decolonial approach. So what he's doing is he's drawing in phenomenology in particular and putting it into conversation with folks who had not really been in conversation with it. So many people throughout philosophy in the 20th century are influenced by phenomenology, but there tends to be a kind of core Eurocentric grouping of phenomenological texts that doesn't take into account what's going on elsewhere in the world, specifically in the Americas, which is why Fanon is such a powerful figure. Fanon's final work, The Wretched of the Earth, and Emmanuel Levinas' major work, Totality and Infinity, come out the same year. There's no reason to believe that there would not have been some engagement with Fanon's work given his popularity in France amongst the intellectual communities in France at the time. There's no reason to believe that Levinas would not have at least encountered Fanon's ideas, but there is significant doubt as to whether or not he absorbed those ideas. And so this is one of the things that Maldonado Torres is really good at doing, is putting these characters, putting these folks into conversation with one another. Now, what I really, really love about Maldonado Torres' work, besides how good it is in terms of both being phenomenology and being this decolonial interdisciplinary approach, is that it's such a great way of, sorry, my phone is buzzing, so I'm just going to put it into, there we go. Okay. It's such a great way to end the semester because he weaves everything together. Right? He weaves everything together. We get discussions about identity. We get discussions about coloniality. We get discussions about decoloniality. All of this is woven together in really cool ways. All right. So, let's see. Everything working? Yeah, everything's working. The one thing I've noticed about a live stream that I both like and is terrifying is that it feels live because it feels live. I feel this sort of pressure, good pressure, that I have to be doing things. The scary part is there are 1,000 moving parts, right? There is not hitting the mic that I just hit, right? There's like all of this stuff that you can't see right now that I'm like looking down at and having to monitor and all of this stuff, right? That is not like being in class. So it's this interesting sort of like, I wonder how to streamline this or whatnot. But it's just, I don't know. It's something I notice. It's interesting. And you got to like constantly check like, oh, hey, is this processing? Is this one program communicating with YouTube? Is it not? So anyway, it's just checking a lot of stuff. So, I'm going to take another sip of coffee. I might just chug the rest of this coffee, and then we're going to jump right into talking about the first 5 of these theses. All right. Okay. Gotta stretch. This chair is bad in every way. So Maldonado Torres begins his outline of 10 theses on coloniality and decoloniality by talking about the university. And he talks about the university with a fair amount of criticism because of something that I mentioned in the Lugones video. I might not have mentioned it. I might just be thinking of a connection and not have actually made that blatantly clear. But when we use this term decolonize, it cannot be a metaphor. Side note or visual footnote for you. Decolonization is not a metaphor by Eve Tuck is an absolutely essential read if you want to continue thinking along these lines. Decolonization is not a metaphor. Phenomenal work. So worth your time. But this term gets used very flippantly or loosely. And it gets used in that way by people who are within universities in particular, where there is a temptation to become socially disobedient in thought, but not deed. And let me unpack that for you a little bit. There is a term, a pejorative term that gets used against people who espouse Marxist ideas but exist within some of the higher rungs of society, or they themselves are deeply benefiting from the status quo. And that pejorative term is a champagne socialist, which is so long as you don't have to suffer, you're going to push for universal programs for a kind of centralized or collectivist view of society. But you don't want anything about your life to change. You want everything else to change. And so you espouse these ideas from a position of social elitism, for lack of a better term. Things are a lot more nuanced than that. But that pejorative term, I think, really gets at the heart of what Maldonado Torres is talking about here. Decolonization, language, and discourse within a university setting is often put forward by people who have no skin in the game, or who are unwilling to take the step to have skin in the game, right? He says, there are those who will talk about decolonization and then go back to their, six-figure salaries. In some universities, you get paid gobs of money to be a professor. That is a very small percentage of those who are professors. Most professors are essentially working a very standard middle-class existence and living a very standard white middle-class existence. But still the idea stands, right? That this term, this term is a difficult one to wrestle with, because to use it genuinely or sincerely means that you are using it not just by speaking it, but embodying what that looks like. And what does that look like? Well, he says so on like the third page of the article. He says, these are the ones who continuously seek to decolonize the university and who, when the students organize, join the students in that effort. The difficulties that students face in their protests and interventions are, therefore, one part of a multi-layered and intergenerational struggle that includes at least some faculty members and administrators. The faculty members and administrators work within the constraints of their position, but this does not mean that the pressures, bad faith, and hostility that they face is any less lethal than what students find in their day-to-day encounters with epistemic and pedagogical brutality. Pretty rough words, but good ones, right? What he's saying, as far as I understand it, is that these decolonizing efforts are going to require you to have, for lack of a better term, skin in the game. You're going to suffer in order to achieve the goals that you seek, which is an equitable education for all. And where the decolonial turn happens is in not just looking at one class as, okay, this is the class, right? So this is the class where we learn about decolonial thinking. This is the class where we learn about anti-racism. And as a result of this one class, everything is better. That one class is the introduction to an encounter that is a perpetual encounter throughout your life. And one has to turn from the one class to the structures of the university as a whole, to the social forces that are weighing in on the university, because no one class, no one talk, no one lecture, etc. is going to be the be-all, end-all fix for all of the social ills that we face. Nor is it going to be the one thing that's needed to bring about some kind of decolonial utopia. It's much longer and more nuanced than that. In the article itself, Maldonado Torres shifts from talking about the university and bringing up this point to say, look, one of the things that we can see is that the way that students are treated in the university has connections to a certain kind of philosophical or political liberalism. Again, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Not the same thing as being is like a member of the Democratic Party, but philosophical liberalism is a particular political belief system, structure, methodology, way of doing politics. There's a certain form of that political liberalism that that on the one hand wants to hold on to this anti-racist language, on the other hand doesn't want to give up their champagne. And as a result, lives in what he calls bad faith. And he's echoing Lewis Gordon and Jean-Paul Sartre there. Bad faith is a kind of almost like self-gaslighting, like it's self-denial. Anyway, these types of institutions, liberal institutions that he talks about, in a modern colonial world, aim to advance modernity, advance this kind of discourse, but no real change, without realizing that they are doing exactly that and perpetuating a continuation of coloniality as the logic of colonialism. And you can look at that in the example of Puerto Rico, right? Which he definitely brings up. Let's see. I think it's time for background change. There we go. Time for a background change. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's yeah, the difference between non-racist and anti-racist. Yeah. That um I have that book here somewhere. Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. Um yeah, I've got some thoughts, but they're like the sort of, this is great. You phrase it this way. Why? Sort of critique question type things, but that book is phenomenal. That book is great if you are looking for the kind of book to maybe start a book club and talk with people about. That book is choice. It's so good. I crushed it in like 2 days. Because it's mostly a biography, but very good. Anyway, all right, where are we? Jumping back into it. Hold on, I'm good. Not COVID. I'm fine. I'm just talking a lot. Okay. I mean, I'm touching my face all the time, but I have like hand sanitizer everywhere in this house. So we're good. Yeah. No, those are both good points that you make, y'all, about the naming of diseases and whatnot. I would highly suggest a podcast called Sawbones. The past 2 months have been all connected to, in some way, global epidemics, global pandemics, and COVID and medical history. It's fantastic if you're interested in that stuff. The way that I describe it is it scratches a Foucauldian itch that is not at all weird. But all right, so let's jump into this. Jump back into it. So I'm gonna quote. I am going to quote Maldonado Torres, talk a little bit about Foucault, and then quote Maldonado Torres again. So this is from page 5. If you're following along at home, on page 5, he says, universities become centers of command and control, which makes them easy to militarize when opposition arises. Many students feel choked and breathless in this context. And in this sense, he is speaking not unlike Foucault does when he talks about disciplinary power, or even Aristotle's notion of imitation and moral formation, because Western epistemology has known that practices shape people. And so when you're looking, again, not one class, but what is the whole curriculum teaching? What is the whole curriculum, not just the classes, but the milestones, the important events, the major speakers that are brought in? What is all of that doing to form you into certain types of people and persons, right? That's what he's talking about. And if these universities are operating out of this liberal framework, then they are perpetuating forms of coloniality that they are not necessarily aware of or honest about. And then he makes this point, and this is on page 7. He says, the point is rather that one can only criticize properly when one knows enough about what one is criticizing, and that the only way to know enough about movements that seek decolonization is not by studying them in books or looking at them from the outsides. Too many times, some academics state that they agree with the principles of a struggle, but not with the practices of those advancing the struggle. They also feel that their job is to comment on the excesses they observe, and they tend to think that if they are critical of the state or of the established order, that they need to engage in some equal opportunity criticism and target the movements as well, as if the state and the movements were on a horizontal plane. Powerful words. There is a way of doing critique. All right, back at it. Okay, back at it. Yeah, here we go. All right. I'm just going to skip ahead. Also on page 7, Maldonado Torres says this. He says the decolonial movements tend to approach ideas and change in a way that does not isolate knowledge from action. These movements combine knowledge, practice, creative expressions, among other areas, in an effort to change the world. For them, colonization and dehumanization demand a holistic movement that involves reaching out to others, communicating, and organizing. A new kind of knowledge and critique are produced as part of that process. That is, decolonial knowledge production and critique are part of an entirely different paradigm of being, acting, and knowing in the world. If you're looking for a juicy quote, there is one. Yeah, but the point there being that this separation between, say, activism or engaging in direct action or indirect action of some kind, and the work of critique, the work of understanding, the work of challenging and questioning, that those are totally separate things, is a false dichotomy. It is a false separation. One can think from within on either side. One can think and act. One can act and then reflect. Right? Both can be connected. So that brings us to the theses. That brings us to the theses. So before that, any questions? Any questions from the chat? Yeah? Any questions from the chat? Let's throw on some transition music while we wait. All right. So, thesis 1. I'll give you, how about this? I'm going to give you my take on what the 5 theses are, and then we'll jump into them with a little bit more depth. Okay. Let me adjust this real quick. There, that is better. Yeah. Okay. So, thesis 1. Words like decolonization and coloniality are scary. And they make people afraid because they ask us to change. Thesis 2. Coloniality is the logic of colonialism at work. Thesis 3. Metaphysical catastrophe naturalizes war. Thesis 4. What is unthinkable becomes normalized, becomes the unthought. And thesis 5, rethinking philosophy is necessary from the position of the wretched of the earth, not a Eurocentric, bourgeois, white bourgeois Eurocentric male, to quote, paraphrase Sylvia Wynter. So, let's jump into these theses a bit more. First thesis, colonialism, decolonization, and related concepts generate anxiety and fear. Anyone who introduces the question about meaning and significance with regard to colonialism and decolonization, so Maldonado Torres says, faces a decadent and genocidal modern colonial attitude of indifference, obfuscation. Are we good? Are we good? We are back. Awesome. Okay. I think we're back. Are we back? Hopefully we're back. All right. I'm going to move quickly so that hopefully we can beat the disconnection tide, as it were. Also because I've been doing this for almost an hour. So, Thesis 1. One of the reasons this is so scary, these terms are so scary, comes from a quote that Maldonado Torres says on page 9. He says that one important consideration in relation to the idea that decadent and bad faith responses are already inscribed in disciplines, methods, and texts is that individuals only have to rely on what they take as established knowledge in order to justify and hide from themselves the problematic character of their bad faith, decadence, and phobias. This is why individuals, particularly academics in this case, seldom feel racist themselves, right? It's on an individual level where it becomes a problem. Oh, hey, it's Josh. Hello, Josh. Anyway, yeah, so the idea here, again, is that coloniality is baked into the structure of the world that we live in. We've talked about this all throughout class, right? We've talked about how these ideas are still operative and they have formed our disciplines. I mean, one of the things that I opened up the class with was talking about how my own academic and intellectual formation was deeply, deeply Eurocentric and colonialist. And it was really kind of a fluke that led me down a different trajectory. And that's a problem because it shouldn't be that way, right? It should be a different thing. And we'll get to this more in Thesis 5. But for the time being, what we're dealing with, what Maldonado Torres is trying to say is this produces fear because of the structures of the things that have brought us comfort. Deny their complicity in things that are bad, exclusive, racist, sexist, colonialist, that kind of a thing. When you deny that, and you find comfort in a thing, you end up supporting a status quo that owes you nothing, but demands your total fealty to reproduce it. Okay, so let's move on to thesis number 2. Coloniality is different from colonialism, and decoloniality is different from decolonization. This thesis is relatively easy to talk about, largely because we've kind of covered this all semester long. Coloniality is the logic that lingers after the colonial experiments and projects have gone away. To decolonize in that 1960s kind of a way is very different from decoloniality as what Maldonado Torres is pushing forward, which is a way of thinking, being, and acting in the world. To be a decolonial thinker is different than to be a decolonizing revolutionary. It's not to say that one can't be both, but it's different. And this is one of the areas where language can be a bit ambiguous. Why, at least for myself, I've started to move more towards talking about anti-colonial work, because decoloniality is so connected to that revolutionary impulse that if one is doing it within the framework of epistemology, of academics, of pedagogy, etc., one is doing this work in a different register. It does not mean that one is a champagne socialist, as we were talking about before. It also doesn't mean that you have to be, I don't know, like Che Guevara. It means that you are doing something that is not disconnected, but different from that kind of revolutionary activity. And there, I'm sure, many who will disagree with that way of putting it, but that at least is what I think is going on in this particular thesis. So let's move on to thesis number 3. So in thesis number 3, Maldonado Torres talks about modernity coloniality as a form of metaphysical catastrophe that naturalizes war. Now, there's a book that I wanted us to read that we did not have time to read. Not really the whole book, so much as at least Maldonado Torres chapter in it, and that's this book right here. This book is called Aftershocks of Disaster, Puerto Rico Before and After the Storm, edited by 2 amazing scholars, Yarimar Bonilla and Marisol Lebron. Both are crazy good. Lebron just had a book that came out this past year called Policing Life and Death that examines law enforcement on the island of Puerto Rico, which is really good. And Bonilla is just a phenomenal anthropologist. Well worth your time to read her as well. Both of them. And this book is very good. But in it, at the end of it, is a chapter by Maldonado Torres. Let me find the title. It's called Critique and Decoloniality in the Face of Crisis, Disaster, and Catastrophe. Now, Maldonado Torres talks about catastrophe specifically because of those other terms. And metaphysical catastrophe is an even more fundamental term to wrestle with. So let me unpack them. A disaster is a thing that happens that you have no control over. A crisis is something that happens that is almost entirely of human making. A catastrophe is something that is ungovernable. That is kind of the way that human activity can it's kind of the way that human activity can interject and impose itself upon the physical world around us and create situations wherein people who are particularly vulnerable to things like natural disasters. So if you think about, say, a hurricane, there are people who live in buildings that are able to withstand hurricanes. There are people who are able to escape from a place to evacuate, and there are folks who are not. There are folks who are not able to do that. There are folks whose lives are utterly wrecked by a disaster happening. But if we only think about it at the level of disaster, of just, a big storm, or we only think about it at the level of, oh yeah, there's like this weird flu going on outside. We're missing a lot of what is going on. And a lot of what is going on is that there are structures and policies and systems at work that are undercutting the ability of human beings to live lives of dignity, health, and well-being. And it is putting certain bodies on the front lines, certain bodies in harm's way, more so than others. And in doing that, in putting certain bodies on the line more so than others, it creates a catastrophe. So that's those three terms. Now, what does it mean for there to be a metaphysical catastrophe? A metaphysical catastrophe, says Maldonado Torres, changes the meaning and function of the basic parameters of geopolitical, national, as well as subjective and intersubjective dynamics, to the extent that it creates a world to the measure of dehumanization. It turns a potential world of human relations into one of permanent forms of conquest, colonialism, and war. This means that the extraordinary behavior that takes place in war becomes normal and ordinary in colonial contexts and wherever there are colonial subjects. This paradigm can be in effect in actual wars and genocidal practices as well as in democratic societies. Metaphysical catastrophe can therefore be understood as the production of zones of being human and zones of not being human or not being human enough. Living in the zone of being human means finding oneself, others, and institutions of one's society, affirming one's status as a full human being with a broad range of potentials and possibilities, even in precarious conditions of poverty. Living in the zone of subhumanity means not only that one is meant to have easy access to one is not meant to have easy access to basic means of existence, but also that it is normal for everything and everyone to question one's humanity. So Nathan, there it is. There's your human, non-human, subhuman, and zone of humanity, zone of subhumanity that you've been talking about since, what was it, day 1 or 2? Since Gross-Figuel was talking about it. But this is what metaphysical catastrophe does. What metaphysical catastrophe does is it undercuts the structure, the form of meaningful humanness, and it opens us up for the naturalization of war. The naturalization, or a term that I like better in this context especially, is tropicalization. What is meant there? That's from another. I'm borrowing this from another essay in Aftershocks of Disaster. This book. In that book, tropicalization is mentioned as taking this idea or trope that the tropics are a primitive place, a place that is wild in the sense of hurricanes and all kinds of stuff. Number 2. And number 3, that the people who live there kind of deserve what they get because where they live is so bad, right? Is so open to disaster. And to naturalize, well, if you don't want to get wrecked by a hurricane, you might as well not live in Hurricane Alley, right? Completely misses the boat. It's completely wrong. It's completely backwards. Because because it treats things as a disaster. It naturalizes certain people as in the zone of the non-human or subhuman, and certain people in the zone of the human. The people who live in temperate zones. If you've ever been in St. Louis in the summer, it doesn't feel super temperate. Doesn't. But that is a term that gets used. All right. 2 more theses and then we're going to pack it up and head out. So let me just check and make sure everything is good. Okay. 4th thesis. The immediate effects of modernity and coloniality include the naturalization of extermination, expropriation, domination, exploitation, early death, and conditions that are worse than death. What is unthinkable? This is how I paraphrased it. What is unthinkable becomes normalized, becomes unthought. That which is unthinkable, and I mean this term in the sense of, is unthinkable that one would do such a thing. Like, I can't even make it intelligible that one would act in this way or treat other human beings in this way. Becomes naturalized. Certain people have to suffer in the name of the economy, in the name of a future for certain groups of people, in the name of certain ideals, right? And that becomes naturalized in such a way that then when the unthinkable happens, one doesn't even think about it. So it's 2 senses of the unthinkable, right? This is why I say that which is unthinkable: torture, genocide, starvation, these sorts of things, denying rights, removing citizenship from groups of people, separating people, and separating families, putting children in cages. The unthinkable becomes naturalized. It's because of where they're from. It's not because they're children. The unthinkable becomes naturalized and becomes the unthought in the background of what's going on. That is metaphysical catastrophe. That is beyond disaster. It is unmanageable, unfathomable, and utterly, utterly mundane. And think about how many headlines come your way. How many things are spoken of in all these different avenues of news media and whatnot that are the unthinkable, said as normally as possible. Right? It becomes normalized. This is this at work. Brings us to the 5th thesis. And here is where rather than just talking about this thesis, I want to talk about this class. I want to talk about philosophy in general. The 5th thesis is simply this: coloniality involves a radical transformation of power, knowledge, and being. And that leads to the coloniality of power, coloniality of knowledge, the coloniality of being. Maldonado and Torres is following Fanon here. For Fanon, the subject is constituted, they're thrown into a situation, and they are constituting. They are a meaning-making and interpreting being that stands at the intersection of being, power, and knowledge. The Fanonian subject is one who is both the product and the generator of the social structure, culture, and entire worldview of a time. And Fanon approaches the subject not only as a key element in the constitution of being, power, and knowledge, but also as perhaps the most direct and central element that connects them to each other. The wretched of the earth, le dame de terre, is a subject who appears at the crux of the coloniality of power, coloniality of knowledge, coloniality of being. What Fanon is doing, and what Maldonado is following along with, is rethinking who is the central figure for philosophy. So often, philosophy thinks and does its work within Cartesian registers or Heideggerian registers. It's the subject, the thinking thing, the ego cogito, the res cogitans, or it's Dasein, the being that is deeply concerned with itself all the time. But what if that wasn't the case? What if le dame de terre, the wretched of the earth, or, to quote the Bible, a dangerous thing on YouTube to be sure, the least of these were the central figure? What would it look like if, rather than centering Sylvia Wynter's image of the bourgeois Eurocentric white male, the primary site of experience was the non-Western black woman's experience? How different would things be in terms of our systems of thought? Or how different would they be if, rather than universalizing and pushing a provincial idea, we recognize that provinciality? That what is true for me is true, really, really, really true within this particular context. But as that context bleeds out into a different context, culturally, politically, religiously, geographically, that wherein it is more than just relatively true. And this is difficult because we tend to operate as human beings as though our experience is universal. But Maldonado Torres is calling us to something more. Fanon is calling us to something more. Sylvia Wynter is calling us to something more. And my hope is that this class has called us all to something more here. We can think with more nuance. We can think with more charity. We can think with more of an eye to the variety and multiplicity of human experiences, the variety and complexity of humans in relation to other humans. We can do all of that with a profound sense of love. And Maldonado Torres is not the one who came up with this. He quotes De Souza Santos, I forget his first name, who came up with this definition. But in a video, Maldonado Torres talked about the decolonial definition of philosophy. If philosophy, understood historically in the ancient Greek sense, has meant essentially the love of wisdom, it is oftentimes not acted that way. The discipline, the tradition, the project of philosophy is oftentimes acted as the love of knowledge. from particular people who happen to have power, or who happen to have a lot of money or status that you have ascribed to them. But the decolonial definition of philosophy is one where what we seek are new ways of loving and understanding. It's not loving wisdom. It is loving and the wisdom of love and understanding, and how understanding is a form of love. To be understood by someone is to be loved by them. To love someone is to seek to understand them with nuance, with complexity, with care. These are not separate things. They're not the same thing, but they are not separate things. Philosophy is, when we think about it in this decolonial definition, an attempt to develop new ways to love and new ways to understand and new ways to do both together. And that ultimately is, for me, what philosophy is about. How it's practiced, tons of different ways and methods and all kinds of stuff like that. But ultimately, it is about finding new ways of loving and understanding together. So, as we come to the end of the semester, for seniors, as you come to the end of your college career, as we come to a place where things are going to change, I would encourage you, I would invite you to think about ways to get creative with how you love and understand others. Lord knows those of us who've been cooped up for like 2 months almost. Lord knows we need it. Lord knows we need that. Cool. So that's Maldonado Torres. Gonna stick. You're not gonna. Why is it so poor? There we go. We'll go back to this one. All right. So one of you asks, what do you say to people who see these ways of thinking as counterproductive? Because, like, they're wrong. But, so I'm going to talk about a couple of terms from political philosophy. Oddly enough, from Plato and Aristotle, really, that hopefully will clarify things. Coercion and persuasion. Coercion means kind of forcing people to do something. a tank, like a military tank, is a military tank is coercive. An argument is supposed to be persuasive. And I think that part of the task for those of us who are able to communicate and understand these ideas, and if we think that they're good, is to push for more persuasive arguments in the favor of these ideas. You're not going to be able to convince everybody, but potentially we're able to convince enough people if you're in favor of, decolonial ideas or something of that nature. But it's tough. It's really tough. I mean, one of the big questions that a guy that I really like, let me see, I have his book right here, Daryl Wanzer Serrano. One of the things that he constantly asks in a really good podcast, really to a lot of the things that we've done in this class called Imagining Latinidades, he talks about how do we translate these ideas for Theo or Thea? How do we translate them for our uncles or aunts? And that means that we have to wrestle with it, right? Because a term like decolonization might be too unwieldy, might put someone off. On the other hand, maybe they need to be, be put on their heels, as it were. But, I think finding effective means of communicating major ideas and being willing to do that, it takes courage, but it's also a necessary step, to have these kinds of arguments. Isn't it just positive nonsense? I don't know if it's positive nonsense. Yeah, it turns into a rhetorical strategy pretty quick. But bearing in mind that a rhetorical strategy can't be all, right? There has to be substance to it. The more substantive it is, the easier, I don't know if I would say easier, the better the rhetoric would be. I don't know. Email Dr. Bernico about it. He would have lots of things to say about it, I'm sure. I am not a rhetorician. Rhetorician? I don't know. Other questions you might have, please let me know. I am happy to answer them. Yeah. Rhetoric can't raise the dead, as the Thrice song goes, which is like peak person who went to a Christian college, right? To quote Thrice on a live stream with a sandwich in the background. I did that just for you, Violet, the sandwich. Nah, we'll go. Here we go. We'll go the Young Lords. There we go. We'll go the Young Lords. Any more questions? Oh, I'm going to wait. If anybody has a question, you also feel free to email me. And once the questions, if you don't have any more questions, I've got probably one or two more things to say, and then we'll call it. Yeah, we have gone our obligatory hour and a half. Yeah. All right. I am All right. Does not look like there are more questions, so I am going to wrap things up. Um, First of all, thank you so very much for a really, really wonderful class time. This is one of, if not my absolute favorite class to teach. This class is my baby. Um, in many respects, it is my baby because I dreamed of doing something like this and was able to make it happen, work with others to make it happen. And it has challenged me in all the best ways. It has affirmed me in all the best ways, and is felt like doing philosophy, if there is a right way, the right way. And so I'm just really, really, really thankful, really grateful to have had an opportunity to talk about these ideas with you, to wrestle with these questions, to do all of that. I absolutely love students, and to get to do this work with students has been just an absolute joy and a privilege. And I am just so thankful for all of you. I'm so thankful. I was thinking about the last time I taught this, and just thinking about the majors that I had in there and the students I had in that class. And it's weird because they blur together with this one, but in a really good way. Like, I remember the questions that that first class, that 2018 class asked, and I hear them making their jokes, making their comments, asking their questions in the background of this one. And it's just beautiful. It is beautiful. So I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what it holds for you. I don't know what it holds for me. What I do know is that when I had to say goodbye to somebody who I looked up to a lot, his name was Dr. Edwin Estevez. I mean, he's still around. He exists. He's awesome. But he was a former vice president of academic affairs at Greenville University. He was the guy who more or less hired me into being the honors director and all kinds of stuff. And just somebody who I deeply, deeply respected. Still deeply respect. He was moving on to a different job. And when I went to say goodbye to him, he's a large dude, very tall, big guy. Wraps me in bear hug. And he said just 2 words to me. He just said, "Keep fighting. Keep fighting." And I've thought about that a lot. I've thought about what does it mean to keep fighting? What are we fighting, etc. I think we are fighting simplistic ideas of how the world works. I think we're fighting selfishness. I think we're fighting intentional misunderstanding. But I think most of all, there are these moments that we get when we are with one another that are profoundly beautiful. And we fight for a world where they keep fighting.